I'm Gary Cohen, Joe's son, and standing next to me is my sister Cheryl. We're going to do our best to share our love of our Father with you. We'll do our best not to get too teary-eyed as we're going along. Thank the Adopt clergy and Chevra members. They've been so very helpful to us at this difficult time. And we also want to thank the wonderful care professionals at Methodist Hospital, Methodist Hospice, and NC Little Hospice who are caring for Dad in his final days. Joe was the most wonderful and caring father any child could ask for. No request of him was ever met with anything other than, I'll do whatever I can. Dad was always concerned about others and always cared for others before himself. He was the most unselfish man I've ever seen. Our parents, Joe and Fidel, were together for over 66 years. They met on a road trip to Mason City, Iowa, for the wedding of Lou and Marion Dorfman. Dad was the best man in the wedding, and Mom was a good friend of Marion's, and the rest was history. They were a team that supported each other through sickness and in health, and through richer and for poorer. Joe could never do enough for the love of his life, Fidel. He supported her activities in the Minneapolis chapter of Hadassah for many years. He helped with the annual Funtennial event that us older folks here today will fondly recall. And I remember one time as a young child sitting to his left side as he drove our station wagon as we were transporting the wheels of chance and boards that he and my Uncle Frank Shockett of blessed memory had put together. And you spun the wheel and you picked a number and you would win. To this day, I'm not quite sure how it's possible to drive with a small child sitting to your left, but somehow my father did that. They lived for 63 years on their home on Drew Avenue on the south side of Cedar Lake in Minneapolis. They moved in there just before I was born in 1952. And they stayed there until moving to the Park Shore Senior Apartments in St. Louis Park in June of 2015. Our father worked incredibly long hours in all his years in the local trucking business. Then as now, it's an awfully hard way to make a living. From his return from World War II to 1963, the year Cheryl was born, Minnesota cartage and right-way cartage were his livelihood. As a young boy, I can recall helping out by sorting freight bills at home, and I'm told I was able to do that by the company logos on the freight bills. I'm guessing there were different child labor laws back then that allowed me to do that. And as a young child, I must have complained at some point that I just didn't get enough stuff in the mail. And for some time after that, I would get items in the mail at home, like brochures to buy trucks and trailers. And sometime later, I found that if I took off the Gary Cohen label, underneath it, it said it had been mailed to someone at Minnesota Cartage and then sent to me. In 1963, the business folded and he went to work for Jim Goldberg at United Van Bus Delivery. Times were tough in those first few years after 1963. He'd work 6 days a week, he'd be gone in the morning before we got up, and would get home late in the evening. I can recall being him on some Saturdays when he'd be spotting trailers at a customer location in preparation for Monday's work. He'd let me sit in the tractor cab with him, and sometimes he even let me help crank up the dolly wheels on the trailer. One time I can recall trying to take a shortcut under a trailer, but little did I know if you did that, you would get covered with grease and gunk from the bottom of the trailer, so I learned that lesson quickly. As times got better, he became a part owner at United Van Bus. He still kept working those long hours as that was what he did. Both Cheryl and I can recall and I know he headed over to her sorority at the U more than one time to get that car running in the winter cold. I spent my college summer years working at Van Bus, and when I got out of college and didn't get a teaching job, I went to work there full time. He'd always said to me, "You don't want to come to work here." I cherished being at the same place with my dad for 9 years. It took me that long to realize he was right about not working in the trucking business. There are so many stories I could tell about those days at Van Bus, most of which should not be told from the bema of a synagogue. But here's one I can share. Mom and Dad were off on a vacation to some warm, sunny location during a cold Minnesota winter. Some pipes froze in an area of the terminal that was exposed to cold air. Some of the shop employees took a blowtorch to the frozen pipes to try to thaw them out. Some old wooden timbers near the pipes caught fire, and the Minneapolis Fire Department had to come to put the small fire out. No one ever told Dad about it. But a few weeks later, someone from the fire department came to talk to Joe about the fire, and he had to admit he didn't know what the fire inspector was talking about. So later he came to me and said, "Son, did you try to start the building on fire while I was gone?" He'd had serious medical issues at many stages of his life. After one episode at Methodist Hospital, he said he wanted to give back to the folks who saved his life. He became a full-time volunteer at Methodist, and that was his second career for 24 years. He volunteered at Methodist for over 40,000 hours. He would joke that they let him do everything except surgery, and Cheryl and I bet that he'd been great at that if they would have let him try it. He spent much of his last weeks at Methodist. The staff at the hospital and hospice were amazing, and there were so many folks who knew him and said, "My goodness, that's our volunteer Joe." He spent his last hours at NC Little Hospice in Edina, and the staff there is beyond words. They made sure his last hours were pain-free. Our father wasn't the most religious man. It would have been hard to get a minion in Little Cresco, Iowa, where he spent his early years. After his father, Sam, our grandfather, passed away in 1981, Dad was a regular attendee at Sunday Night Minion. When he'd had bypass surgery and was unable to drive, I joined him on Sunday nights. He was a faithful Sunday night attendee until his lack of mobility made it impossible for him to attend. I continue that tradition to this day, and I'm one of the lay leaders for Sunday Night Minion. One of my dad's favorite sayings was, "If it wouldn't be too much trouble," followed by what was often a very simple request. And I'm sure if he'd been able, he would have said, "If it wouldn't be too much trouble, son, can you say a few nice things about me when I'm gone?" Consider that request fulfilled, Dad.
Thank you for that really beautiful tribute to your dad and for supporting each other up here as you have so beautifully in these weeks and in your closeness throughout the years. It was a beautiful tribute, not only because it gave all of us a better sense of his life and his accomplishments, which it did. It was moving also because of how clear it was how successful he was in conveying his values to you. I'm always struck when I hear people at this point describe the life of a person who has passed, that there are invariably things about the person that I had no idea of. I have to confess that though I knew Joe Cohen for 29 years, I don't recall him ever once talking about his profession. So a lot of what you said when I sat with you yesterday and in the eulogy today was new. The things that I did know about him that loomed large in my mind when I would ever think of Joe was the way he was so generous with his time. How he would be here on Sunday nights to cover for Minion and would bring you along in these last years as it was harder for him, and that you both kind of stepped into the roles, and I'm sure he was very pleased to see Gary leading the service. These last years when you just kind of stepped up when there was a need. I also knew firsthand of Joe Cohen's tremendous service at Methodist Hospital, where he really was well known for the huge number, 40,000 hours in 24 years that he spent there supporting people in need. It was beautiful hearing you talk yesterday about the contribution he made to comforting so many people who were about to teaching a midrash on Psalm 118, verse 17, the psalm that we recite in offering our gratitude when we celebrate holidays and the new month. It's recited at the end of the Passover Seder. The words in the psalm, 118, 19, and 20, are open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter them and praise the Lord. This is the gateway to the Lord, through which the righteous shall enter. Our Chazan chants them beautifully with this tune. Pitchu li share tzedek, avov amodeya, ze hashar ladonai, tzadikim yavo uvo. The rabbinic midrash on that passage says, at the time of judgment in the world to come, everyone will be asked, what was your occupation? Ma haya malachtecha. If the person answers, I used to feed the hungry, they will say to that person, this is God's gate. Eshar ladonai, you who fed the hungry may enter. If they said, I used to clothe the naked, they will say to that person, this is God's gate. You who clothe the naked may enter. And similarly with those who raised orphans and who performed the mitzvah of tradition ascribes to having written the psalm said, I have done all these, let the gates open for me. And that is why the verse says, Pitchu li share tzedek. Open the gates of tzedek for me, of righteousness for me. I shall enter them thanking the Lord. It's a fascinating text that came to mind as I thought about Joe. It recalls the rabbinic tradition of a person entering heaven and they're asked, Ma haya malach. What was your profession? But the answers are all kinds of qualities that a person displays that show their kindness and their caring. I once heard a colleague, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, explain that this midrash is teaching that what will be important at the end of life is not somebody's profession and not their stature. What will be important is their kindness. And by that measure, for sure, Joe Cohen, though not a big, tall man, was a person of enormous stature. When I asked you near the end of our meeting yesterday about your parents, Gary, Cheryl, Margaret, you commented that Joe and Fidel were joined at the hip, incredible partners in 66 years of marriage. It was poignant to hear you say that they were amazing role models. You said, we saw who they were and followed their example. And Margaret added that, Joe, what a sweetheart. Such a heart. What a sweet man. What amazing tributes to your folks. Fidel, we wish you strength to carry on because your family still needs that role model. So we hope you can be strong for them and find comfort. And as for Joe, though there is tremendous sadness at his passing, there cannot be a question in anyone's mind as we grieve here that he has entered the gates of heaven and is praising God. This is the gate of the Lord through which the righteous shall pass. Zehashar Ladonai Tzadikim Yavo Uvo. Please rise as Chazan now chants El Rachamim, prayer of memory.
El male rachamim, shochen bamromim, ametzei menucha nechona, achar kanfei hashchina, emalot kedoshim utehorim, kezohar harakia, mazhirim et nishma. Yosef ben Shmuel Sara, shehalach leolamo, began Eden de menuchato, anabal arachamim, astireu besefer knafech leolamim, Utzeror b'tzaror chaim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanoach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar
Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, who shine with the splendor of the firmament, the soul of our dear Joe Cohen, Yosef ben Shmuel Visara, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, remember all of his worthy deeds in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May his memory always inspire us to attain dignity and holiness in life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. The service will now continue graveside at Chesed Shel Emet Cemetery in New Hope. The family will be here this evening for services during Shiva and tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. They appreciate the love and comfort that you offer to them in the weeks and months ahead.
Amen.